Kaya natin yan. Kaya natin yan. Kung nais umasenso, manap ng trabaho, o di kaya'y subukang magnegosyo. Lumikha ng produkto't sikaping lumago, inspirasyon mong pagkapiko. Katuwang ng gobyerno sa iyong tagumpay, iisa ang ating hangarin. Pag may abilidad at oportunidad, tiyak na ang lahat ay uunlad. Trabaho, negosyo, kabuhayan, kaya natin yan.
Walang iwanan.
Go lang ng go mga kaibigan. Trabaho, negosyo, kabuhayan, kaya natin yan.
Sulong Pilipinas.
Go, 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 kababayan. Kaya natin yan. Kaya natin yan. Kayaw magtipid sa iyong mga pangarap. Sige-sige sa pagsisikap. Asenso'y sigurado sa hinaharap. Manalig lang palagi sa sarili. Trabaho, negosyo, kabuhayan, kaya natin yan.
Walang iwanan.
Go lang ng go mga kaibigan. Trabaho, negosyo, kabuhayan, kaya natin yan.
Sulong Pilipinas.
Go, 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 kababayan. Kaya natin yan. Kaya natin yan.
Over 7,641 islands, the Philippines is rich in crops, livestock, poultry, and fishery. Through innovations and processing, we can produce globally competitive quality products. Based on the recent statistics, Philippine agriculture gained a 5.28% growth in the first quarter of 2017, whereas the growth value of agricultural production amounted to 407.6 billion pesos. As agriculture flourished domestically and abroad, each region contributes to its continuous growth. The following are the top investment commodities of every region. Known as the gem in the north, Region 1's main crop is rice, which is being cultivated in their lands 2 to 3 times a year, followed by corn and mango. Its champion commodities also include tobacco, fruits, livestock, and other different crops such as garlic, eggplant, mung bean, peanut, and fisheries. Dubbed as the peanut and mango capital of the country, Region 2 is also the top producer of corn, rice, livestock, poultry, and fisheries. The region also have a huge production of legumes and root crops. Also known as the rice granary of the Philippines, Region 3 on the other hand is also the top producer of onion, sweet potato, and mung bean. Meanwhile, the Southern Tagalog or Calabarzon's poultry, livestock, coconut, coffee, and hog production contribute a large percentage to the region's economic growth. They are also considered as the industrial house of the country. The Mimaropa, where the bounty of harvest meets the goodness of nature, is known as the home of Calamansi King in Oriental Mindoro. Alongside this top commodity, rice, vegetable, poultry, fishery, cashew, corn production also contribute to their economic growth. Pili, pineapple, and gabi are the top growing commodities in Region 5. Bicol Region's agricultural production continue to rise internationally with the prevalence of good export activities. Region 6, on the other hand, has coined Mananam as one of its priority investment opportunities. Mananam is an acronym for agricultural commodities such as mango, aquaculture, native chicken, natural fiber, abaca and piña, and muscovado sugar. For aquaculture, the emerging commodities are live grouper, milkfish, oysters, and seaweeds. Meanwhile, Guimaras is a world-renowned producer of sweet mangoes. As we speak of mangoes, Region 7 is also at the top of being the country's dried mango capital. Moreover, their agricultural production is also competitive because of processed seaweeds, coffee and cacao, and native chicken. The Philippines is also the largest exporter of banana in Asia and second largest exporter worldwide. One significant contributor is the Eastern Visayas or Region 8. The region is also frontliner in terms of cacao and jackfruit. Zamboanga Peninsula or Region 9 is known as the rubber capital of the Philippines. Coconut, processed fish, seaweeds, livestock, mango, cacao, and other high-value crops are also among the top investment commodities of the region. Region 10 is a proud banana, coffee, and cacao producer. The region is also blessed with vast aquatic resources. The region, together with all other regions in Mindanao, is considered as food baskets in the country. Number 1 in banana, cacao, and coffee is Region 11. The region is tagged as the banana and durian capital of the Philippines. Aside from these, the region also produces fermented beans, corn, rice, abaca, black pepper, coconut, oil palm, hot chili, cassava, rubber, the third largest producer of mango and leading exporter of durian and pomelo, the king of fruits. Sorgen or Region 12 is the pioneer in organic rice export program in the country. They are also known as a major producer of high-value crops like coffee and rubber. The region also relies on poultry, fisheries, livestock, and is a leader in palay and corn production. Meanwhile, the region's top export commodities are asparagus, pineapple, tuna, papaya, and abaca. Region 13, on the other hand, caters a huge percentage in cultivating cacao, coffee, rubber. Moreover, its regional coasts provide various fishery and other aquatic resources. Cordillera Administrative Region is called the vegetable production capital in northern Luzon. Top on their commodities list are coffee, vegetable, and rice. Different varieties of vegetables like potatoes, carrots, cabbages, Chinese cabbage, radish, sayote, sweet peas, and green onions are cultivated in the region. CAR's favorable environmental condition favors the growing of these commodities. Last but not the least, the home of oil palm that contributes 11% production share in the country, the Autonomous Region and Muslim Mindanao. Rubber and coffee are also two of their top investment commodities. The region is the fourth largest contributor of corn in the country. It is also a rich source of tropical fruits like durian, mangosteen, and lanzones. With its immense area, aquatic resources and fisheries thrive in this land. Curatcha, lobsters, sleeper crabs, and other crustaceans can only be found in its deep blue seas. Abundant in resources, bountiful in production, and rich in hard-working people. This is the agribusiness in the Philippines, the land of endless harvests and investments. Invest in agriculture.
Good afternoon, everyone in the West Coast. Magandang gabi po sa inyo from the East and Maayong Adlaw, Philippines. We welcome everyone joining us today on Zoom and Facebook Live. I'm Keesa Ocampo. I'm the Vice President for the Filipino Food Movement and the host of our weekly food show, Culinary Live. Tonight's webinar, Conversations with Agri-preneurs, is the second of a four-part agricultural business webinar series that's organized by the Philippine Departments of Trade and Industry and Agriculture, with the support of the Philippine Embassy and our consulates general across the United States. Last month's webinar gave us the download on government programs, but tonight our goal is to inspire you with some stories of innovation and collaboration from agricultural entrepreneurs themselves. To start off our program, I'd like to introduce Consul General Neil Frank Ferrer of the Philippine Consulate General in San Francisco, with consular jurisdiction over Alaska, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Northern California, Northern Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Washington State, and Wyoming. Consul General Ferrer began the tour of his duty as Consul General here in San Francisco in January of 2021, in the middle of the pandemic. We actually had the pleasure to have him and his wife on an episode of Culinary Live where we made his favorite dish, tinola. Conjen, Neil, kamusta po kayo?
Magandang hapon, Ms. Keesa, and happy to see you and everyone. We're very good, thank you. And yes, magandang hapon at magandang gabi po sa ating mga kababayan dito sa Amerika at magandang umaga po sa ating mga kasama sa Pilipinas. I am honored and privileged to welcome everyone to this afternoon's event. It is a pleasure for me to meet many of you for the first time. I hope that everyone is keeping safe and healthy at this time. I also wish to greet everyone a belated Happy Independence Day. I'm looking forward to a lively discussion at this afternoon's Trabaho Negosyo, Kabuhaya, or TNK webinar on opportunities for entrepreneurship in agriculture, led by our trade commissioners, Celine Layog, and the team from the Philippine Trade and Investment Center, Silicon Valley. The consulate is holding this webinar to promote opportunities for our overseas Filipinos who may be interested in setting up businesses in the Philippines. We believe that the growth in entrepreneurship will have lasting economic benefits for both our overseas Filipinos and the Philippines itself, as it would facilitate the creation of employment back home. We are hopeful, especially at this time, that the Philippines continues to recover from the economic effects brought about by the pandemic, that our overseas Filipinos are encouraged to pursue opportunities in agriculture. As with most countries, the Philippine economy registered negative economic growth in 2020 due to the pandemic. However, the agricultural sector has proven to be relatively resilient, having registered a negative growth of only negative 0.2% in 2020. We expect that the agricultural sector would be one of the main drivers for growth of the Philippine economy during the post-pandemic recovery period. This afternoon, we will hear from Filipino agripreneurs who have set up successful businesses in our agricultural sector. Our featured speakers, namely the Ube Cooperative, ASIN of Philippine XRoads, and the Freshest PH, will be sharing their unique experiences in harnessing the Philippines' agricultural resources, creating sustainable processes, and bringing Philippine products to the U.S. market. We hope that their stories will inspire Filipino Americans to consider becoming agripreneurs themselves and become our partners in growth. Let me close by inviting everyone to our virtual celebration of our National Day and the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the United States, which will be broadcast on the Philippine Consulate's Facebook page at 6 p.m. Pacific Time on June 26 and the online platforms of the Filipino Channel on June 27 and the TFC Cable on July 11. Please join us as we celebrate our National Day by showcasing the best of Filipino talents here in the Bay Area and beyond. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay.
Thank you, Conjen Neil. Our next speaker is the Honorable Undersecretary Ireneo Vismonti of the DTI Management Services Group. Known to be an ingenious and firm leader, he makes sure that the DTI innovates with the times to best deliver its brand of serbisyong higit pa sa inaasahan. Undersecretary?
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Thank you. Good morning from the Philippines and good evening to our kababayans and to our colleagues in government service for joining us from the United States. I'm pleased to be here today to welcome you to our second installment of our four-part Trabaho Negosyo, Kabuhayan, Agribusiness webinars. I wish to thank Consul General Neil Ferrer for his opening remarks. And I also wanted to express my sincere appreciation for our resource persons who have taken time out to their busy schedules to join us today to share their experiences as agri-preneurs. We admire you for being brave enough to start on your own, especially with the endless challenges involved in running and sustaining a business. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc in many parts of the world, including the Philippines, and we, the Department of Trade and Industry, are putting our micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, at the front and center of our priorities. As you know, more than 99% of our registered businesses in the Philippines are MSMEs, and they remain the key engines for growth and development. Many of you are here tonight because you want to try something new. Maybe you have unused or underutilized agricultural lands or resources in the Philippines, or you have friends or relatives back in the Philippines that want to start an agriculture business. You have come to the right place. Together with the Department of Agriculture, we have been exploring ways to open more opportunities for investments in the agriculture sector. I understand that in our first webinar, Undersecretary Aldaba of the DTI and Undersecretary Caballero of the Department of Agriculture talk about the programs provided by our agencies, such as the DTI's Regional Innovation Centers, financing, training, and other tools to help you start your journeys into agribusiness. I hope the information shared with you shows that the Philippine government is ready to provide the necessary support. This time around, we are lucky to have with us a number of Filipino Americans and Filipino agripreneurs who have agreed to spend time with us to talk about their experiences in starting and running businesses, which are all connected with the agricultural sector in the Philippines. We have a company that has been bringing in Philippine Seasalts to the United States, which I understand are highly sought out and used by the most high-end restaurants and chefs across the country. We also have with us a cooperative that have been supplying ube in the Bay Area and other parts of the US. As you may know, ube, also known as purple yam, has become very popular in the United States and almost mainstream, I would say, as we have seen ube ice cream, milk tea, and all kinds of pastries and desserts made with a very humble and very Filipino ube. Last but not the least, we also have with us two young agripreneurs who are running an agri-tech management company as they seek to make fresh and healthy produce available to all Filipinos. As you can see, we have a lineup of very exciting and interesting guests, and I do not want to get in the way of what promises to be a very informative session. I encourage all of you to listen, ask questions, and engage with our resource persons. They are here to give you first-hand advice on getting into agribusiness. Again, we'd like to thank all of you for being here today, especially to the organizers, the members of our the Philippine Trade and Investment Center across the United States, and wish all of you a productive evening. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Undersecretary Vismonte and the DTI for the programs and initiatives that uplift our colleagues and our countryside development. Now we're going to dive into a fun conversation with some of our agricultural entrepreneurs or agripreneurs. Just a reminder for all of you who are joining us either on Zoom or on Facebook Live, you can type in questions into the chat box or the chat function so we can get all of them to our speakers. And if we're unable to answer everything today, I'm sure we can find a way to get back to you. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Our first one is Lennie diCarlo, founder and CEO of XRoads Philippine Seasalt. In a global market where chefs can find the rarest products available, XRoads Philippine Seasalt delivers unique culinary sea salts that enhance a broad range of flavors while empowering small communities halfway around the world and helping to revitalize a fading industry. Lennie, can we see a quick wave?
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're excited, Lennie. All right, our next one is Tita Pearl Parmellee. Tita Pearl Parmellee is a founding member of the Filipino Food Movement, an organization that collaborates with like-minded people, positing that Filipino food is diverse, inclusive, and personal. Her passion project, Ube, earned her the nickname the Purple Lady. How you doing, Tita Pearl?
Yes, I'm wearing purple.
Perfect for the occasion, Tita. We have lots to chat about today. All right, I'd also like to introduce PJ Quesada. PJ is a third-generation family business owner at Ramar Foods, America's leading manufacturer of retail packaged Filipino food products. He's also the chairperson and founder of the Filipino Food Movement, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and progressing Filipino cuisine. Hi, PJ.
Hello.
Glad to
Good local
be
time.
Dynamite. Our next panelist is Fiona Faulkner. She's the founder and CEO of the agri-tech management company, The Freshest. The company is inspired by the farm-to-table movement and hopes to promote a healthier food culture through sustainable food production. Hi, Fiona. I understand it's super early in the morning for you.
Hi, yeah, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
Dynamite.
It's okay, she's a farmer, so she's used to it.
Yeah. I'm actually seeing we also have, last but not least, James Reid. James is the founder and president of Careless Music Manila. He is the food security ambassador of the Philippine Department of Agriculture and is passionate in promoting the involvement of the youth in the industry and increasing support for the men and women who are already in agriculture. James, how's it going?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
We're excited. Actually, you know what? Let's start with you. I think we're going to go around the table really quickly, 1 to 2 minutes. Give us a quick intro. And I kind of wanted to start with a prompt. Which province in the Philippines and food product are you most connected to? Let's start with James.
Well, for me, I'm actually very new to agriculture. I started in 2020, and it was really because of the pandemic when it hit that it became really apparent how important food security was. If I'm being honest, it wasn't something that crossed my mind at all until the pandemic hit. And it became very apparent that not many people had access to both physical access and economic access to just healthy, like self-sufficient, fresh food. Not many people had access to it. So it was really a problem. And we actually started out doing a vegetable delivery service at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's really how it kind of everything started. And for us, we, there's not exactly a province that I would kind of relate to, where we were more focused on hydroponics and urban farming within Metro Manila, which is where we saw a lot of the problem, or at least in my experience, that's where most of the problem was. So yeah, we've been moving more into hydroponics and urban agriculture. There's the Hydro Hub, which I think Fiona can go more into, and also a Reterra, which was a design competition we did. And its aim was really to bring together architects, designers, city planners, so that we could find a way to integrate agriculture into the urban setting, make the cities a bit more greener, give everyone more access to just healthy, fresh food. That was really kind of, what was really important to me.
That sounds great. And so if there's not necessarily a particular province in the Philippines that you feel connected to, may I ask, what is your favorite Filipino food?
My favorite Filipino food of all time has to be sinigang. Yes, I've stuck by that, my whole time here. Sinigang is my favorite, absolute favorite.
Great choice. How about you, Fiona? Quick intro. Which province and food product do you feel most connected to?
So I actually come from a line of farmers. So my mom's family, they've been farming forever. And so we have a few farms in Pampanga and we grow mangoes. So I would say mangoes is the Filipino food product I'm most connected to, especially dried mangoes.
I love it. The best in the world, right?
Yeah.
PJ, how's it going?
Going great. Okay, intro, province, and favorite food, right? Okay, so You heard that I do a lot of things. What I hope that I can bring to this conversation today is as a consumer of these agricultural products. You all know our Magnolia ice cream. Tita Pearl's wearing a shirt. Actually, we buy literal truckloads of ube puree, and that's why my favorite province is Quezon, because most of our ube is actually grown and processed there before it's sent over to us to turn into ice cream. And my favorite Filipino food is, it's always kare-kare. What can I say? Always kare-kare.
I have to say, you make a mean
The meat.
Yeah, it's so
Oh,
good.
thank you.
Tita Pearl, how about you?
Okay. I came from Palawan. My grandfather founded a Culion leper colony, but my favorite town, my husband's town, is Quezon. That's where I started my Ube Federation, which I'm so proud. And my favorite food is also sinigang, fish sinigang.
I love it. Actually, for those of you who don't know, Tita Pearl out here in America is actually a legendary icon. She was the first person to bring Mamacita's products into the US, which really began, I want to say, the distribution of Filipino food products around the country. So Tita Pearl, we are indebted to you. Such shoulders that we stand on with the work that you've been doing for decades, even when people didn't even know who we were and where we were on the map. So Tita Pearl, we're so happy to have you. And
Thank you.
Lennie, how's it going today?
Hi. So I'm in the Philippines, but I grew up here in the States. We came here when I was 4. So all I know really is being an American Filipino. And my family's province is Pangasinan, which I believe is Region 1. So I would say that the agri product would have to be salt, because even Pangasinan means land of salt. So I would say salt. And my favorite food, of course, the Ilocano pinakbet. That's my
so good. So Lennie, actually, now that we're going into the next part of the conversation, this is actually perfect for you. I wanted to know what inspired you to start your business, and what were maybe some of the beginning or some of the history of how you began XRoads Philippine Seasalts.
Well, we actually started we started to bring the salt really as a way to help my family. Where they're from, it's all salt. It's what they do during the season. And it really was going to be just a little small business, see how it worked out. And it did in the very beginning. We obtained distribution, and I was able to start bringing it into various types of restaurants. It wasn't until 2008 when we had the major downturn in the market, jobs were lost, including mine, that I had to decide what to do next, to continue working the financial markets or continue with the business full time. To go with the business full time. And as with anything, your objects of business or your roadmap has to change. You have to evolve. And so we've evolved from helping my family to what I believe now is our new vision, is to help the industry and the people behind it, because we've worked with so many artisans along the way that we've gotten to know that it's really become more bigger than what we had originally started out to do. And so this is where we're at now.
And Lennie, what would you say, this is really like truncating the entire, the entire journey of the career, but what would you say was probably the biggest challenge and the biggest breakthrough that you've had with XRoads Philippine Seasalts?
I would say the biggest challenge would be convincing people, restaurants, businesses to believe in us and try the product. They've never heard of Philippine sea salts before. They've always heard of the French fleur de sels. And who were we to come in and bring in this salt that's never been outside and never been heard of? So I had to go around knocking on doors of chefs and restaurants and distributors and actually educating them where Philippines is very rich in salt fields, where we were once self-sufficient in making our own salt. And this salt could easily compete worldwide just because of the quality of the salt. So it took a while to do that. And I think the breakthrough came when we started to get our first distributor. And this is a food distributor into the top market where we were what we're covering is a very niche market, which is the high-end restaurants, because what I believe is covering this part of the market will provide a trickle-down effect, especially for a kind of product that we have. And it's been working. I think 15 years now, we're talking about Philippine sea salts in the US and in these great markets that we've been able to break through. And being able to just knock on doors today and know, or chefs contacting me because they know of our product, that's just a gratification for me that all this hard work was able to break through these doors that were once closed to us.
I love that. Something that I also notice is that, during the weekly show that we do, Culinary Live, one of the things that I always remember to explain is that not all salts are created equal, right?
Exactly.
And once you go into the actual terroir of where the salts come from, then you start to notice so much more the intricacies and the nuances of the different salts and how they kind of bring out flavors that, in particular, like chefs are really trying to discover and bring to the surface, right?
Right, exactly. Chefs really understand salt. That's why we targeted them at first. We didn't go to retail because it would take a lot more education to break into the retail market. So we went to the people that consumers look up to. And as with anything, in anything agriculture, and I believe salt is one of them, terroir really plays a huge role in it, where salt from one region can vary compared to salt just in a different barangay because of where the water traverses and what animals or people or things can fall into the waterways, and how the environment and how the people that live in that area take care of the waterways that feed the salt fields. So it definitely plays a huge role.
Thank you so much for sharing. When we talk about salt, I think a lot of the time, coming from the Philippines also, it's like I never really thought of salt to become one of the things or one of the food products to put us on the map. But Lennie, you've done such a great job at creating that pathway for us and for the many other people who are going to be going into that business here on
Thank
after.
you.
But such also is the pathway of ube, which is known to be, a very simple root crop from the Philippines for us, especially when I remember going to Palawan one time and I cooked a meal with members of the Tagbanwa tribe, and we were boiling ube, and that was what we had for dinner. Tita Pearl, where did this come from? Why ube?
Why ube? I think of ube as an ugly duckling of the root crop because it looks ugly on the outside, but in the inside, the different colors of it, some of them have white with, dots of purple. And when I was young, I helped harvesting the ube, and that's my kind of food that I hide. I wasn't proud of it, but I love ube. When I go to school, my classmates eat hot dog, burger. I love the ube, but I hide. I go outside so all these years I always eat ube, but I hide it. It's like I'm in the closet. Now I'm out that I love ube.
On Pride Month, Tita Pearl is out of the closet. I love it.
Out of the closet.
But Tita Pearl, the funny thing too is that, a lot of the challenges, I want to say, of being able to create sustainable pathways for Philippine products really has that factor of hiya, hindi ba? And
Yes.
I think that's why a lot of the time, whenever we think of, what can we potentially grow and produce in the Philippines, we always tend to copy what other countries are doing, right? So say, for
Exactly.
example, if Thailand is doing a certain product, or Vietnam, then we think that, hey, you know what, since Thailand and Vietnam are doing this, maybe we should do it too. But the secret is really in finding something that is unique, hindi ba?
Yes, because like I said, what challenged me really is when people started growing dragon fruit. I said, why go dragon fruit? It's like, it's ugly as well outside. And here comes ube that's endemic to us. So you have to create a demand. And so I did some research, and doing my research, I even found out that ube, UBE, is a color. It's actually called UBI. I said, oh, okay. So, but it's hard to change people's images now on that one. And it's sad that it's like outside the country is they love ube. Us, we don't support our ube producers, our ube farmers. It's just like it's thought of as a poor man's food, but abroad it's expensive. Like I went to this company here producing ube fruit. I mean ube root crop. It's called Freitas, and they charge like $9 a pound. In the Philippines, it's like 39 pesos.
Wow.
So you see the value that foreigners put in our ube product. If we don't put value in our own product, how could we expect others to do it? So,
and also you made a great point about like how it's really up to us to create the demand. And speaking of which, PJ, how did the Filipino food movement and Ramar's ube products help build that demand around the United States? Because as we can see now, most of the Filipino pop-ups that are coming up on every corner, right? Be it like New York or Miami, or if it's like in Wisconsin, I feel like a lot of the first forays that they might go into Filipino food really has something to do with ube.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned, so I've grew up also in the US, always eating ube ice cream, but my family also makes it. So there's this childlike wonder with the color and the flavor and what we're able to do with something like ube. And so I think what we've really seen is, I guess like ube can be considered like the it girl of Filipino cuisine, because it's a hook, and people can't forget that particular tone of purple. And how, I mean, these days you go to a grocery store, you can find ube waffle mix, and it's literally the purple color that just draws people to it. It's completely different and completely unique. And that's why I'm trying to help the Ube Federation and in making sure that the Philippines owns ube like forever.
Yeah. And it's also highly Instagrammable, for a generation that really, if you don't take a picture, it never happened, right? So I think for this generation, that's definitely something that's really become a draw, even if it's something that's like a shallow first step in, right? The one thing that I wanted to ask, BJ, so, a lot of our farmers, specifically in Mindanao, a week ago, I had a conversation with some of them out in Mindanao. They were saying that where they really get stuck is in finding the right or the appropriate funding to be able to pay for certain things, right? So say, for example, one of the more expensive things that they pay for is fertilizer. So how can you tell us a little bit about how the Filipino food movement stepped in, particularly in the story of ube, and what that partnership looked like? Because it's definitely something that sounds like an alternate solution where the banks might maybe not be able to give a competitive or fair APR or loan. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that dynamic kind of fleshed out?
Yeah, that's something actually that we're still kind of contending with as the supply chain continues to mature. And one of the biggest challenges I think that's on the ground is the knowledge on how to obtain the necessary capital. I understand that there are a lot of programs that are available to small farmers in the Philippines. And some of them are reminiscent of programs that are available to farmers in the United States. However, there's still an accessibility issue. If your average farm size is 5 to 10 hectares, how much bandwidth do you really have to go through a complicated application process, for example, just to potentially be rejected? Or time is very, very valuable, especially when you're growing things out of the earth. You can't really waste a lot of that time. What we're seeing today is, compared to what we had about 30 years ago, we used to bring in maybe 5 to 10,000 pounds of ube puree a year. We now go through that in a week easily. And we find ourselves still looking for additional supply. You have the fact that there's the seasonality of ube. You have the fact that there's actually a demand for organic. which I think is also a fantastic opportunity. And there's also the challenges with this global supply chain. And the Philippines is at an interesting challenge. They are the #1 producer of ube, but they're at a supply chain disadvantage because of the development of the supply chain, both in the Philippines and the development of the market to support such exports and imports. So today we're bringing in over 1 million pounds of various processed fruit and fish from the Philippines. And we can't get enough of it. And we're seeing a growing market. Our products are in Walmart now. That was not fathomable just a few years ago. We didn't even think we belonged there. You know, that's a whole other Filipino conversation. But lo and behold, everyone at Walmart wants ube. So we don't know where the lid is on this. And I think some of the conversations we've been having previously with the DTI on how to accelerate and remove friction from the ground level farming to get just raw crops out, to begin dehydration and further processing, so that we can get these products much more widely available to those that are ready to turn them into something new and offer them to a wider market.
You know, Keesa, I have to tell you that this is actually a fact. Ube was, it was off the shelf. Like, we were completely out of the supply sometime around December of last year. And as a matter of fact, I once walked into this little family-owned grocery store in Queens out in New York. And I was asking if they had any ube because I know we were out in California. Do you know they kept a small box behind the counter, which is like behind a plastic barrier, because they said like it's too precious to be left out in the grocery. I mean, it was insane, right? But, you know, to your point, PJ, right now, we're seeing that the international and even just the American market is really willing to pay top dollar for some of our cash crops, right? And right now we've actually identified that, I think, as a food community, to include coconut, ube, we have coffee and cacao. I'm curious to know specifically from Fiona and James, is that the same conversation and viewpoint that the teams are having out in the Philippines? You know, where I'm trying to go with this is, does the international perspective actually match with the local agricultural entrepreneur landscape? What's it looking like right now?
I think you're correct in saying a while ago that the local agriculture industry is very copycat for the regional industry. So, you know, the big valued items right now are dragon fruit. And so there's kind of been a craze on dragon fruit plantations, completely erasing the idea that we should be growing and supporting more endemic varieties such as coconut and ube, and cacao and coffee are questionable on how endemic they are to our country. But yeah, those things have survived. They've lasted quite some time. So to switch again, just because another country seems to do well with a certain crop, is a little kind of reckless, because we have to strengthen our own supply and demand structures before we can accommodate new varieties. And ube is a prime example of something that's been with us forever, but you only have a very few group of people or brands that want to highlight that, like such as the Good Shepherd ube jam, you know. So yeah, that's what I have to say on that.
It's really interesting. I want to say it's almost like a gap, right? Like, and I remember when we were talking sometime last week, it was really a conversation of, you know, we see what the demand is like internationally, and we're now hearing what the trends are within the Philippines. Why aren't we able to kind of meet in the middle a little bit more, right? But, you know, one of the things that the Freshest actually focuses on is sustainability. And, you know, even with a huge demand for ube, for example, or even for the Philippine sea salts, if the industry is unsustainable in the Philippines, then the supply cannot meet the demand. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Freshest is trying to do to meet sustainability and profitability in business, and how that's been working out for you?
What the Freshest would like to do is try to develop and elevate the agriculture industry in the Philippines, but in a hyper localized context. Hence why we do the farm to table kind of operations, because what we'd like to do is secure a demand and ensure the supply. So there's absolute no like wastage or minimal wastage in that process of growing and purchasing, and then there's market feedback to the farmers. So that's what we do on in an urban setting and in a rural setting.
James, one of the projects that I remember you mentioning was a hydro hub, and you were mentioning that in Quezon City, there's a 600 square meter project where everyone is going to be welcome for training and education. Can you tell us a little bit more about this particular initiative and who it's trying to target?
Actually, we'll be beginning it very soon, and it's going to be in Katipunan in QC.
Okay.
And one of the things we'll be doing is creating like a learning center, so we'll be able to educate people more in hydroponics and kind of also how to create your own and things like that. Mm-hmm. Also, the area we're in is surrounded by colleges, so we're really targeting students.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because a lot of people who have backyard space or garden space during the pandemic really started growing things. Like I know my mother started growing this like gigantic pechay. It's like literally like as big as my little brother. It's really ginormous. But there's so many different things that you can do at home so that you have access to fresh vegetables and fruits as well. I guess, one of the things that I wanted to know, and I'm sure a lot of those who are interested in potentially starting their own agricultural business is, if there was one part of the process that you've all been through that you wish was easier or a little bit more streamlined, what would that be? Maybe we can start with
yes.
Go ahead.
For me is like, for example, the ube. The mindset of the Filipino is to just plant by October in time for December. Mm-hmm. I keep telling them we need year-round supply of ube. Don't just because I like to eat puto bongbong not just in December. I like to eat year-round. So the supply is there, but their mindset is harvest ube in October and then sell it by December. I said you could make more if you plant maybe twice a year and plant it in March. So the supply chain is there. Mm-hmm. Just they want to be assured of a buyer. So now we have the buyers and we don't have the product. So we're catching up. So with the ASIN Federation, also they have land reform. They have 2 hectares. We put them together. So the Ube Federation supply all their seeds and they buy all their products, and PJ is promising to buy the rest of them. And so we have the buyers now. And actually, when we approach Trader Joe, like our company sold the ube powder to Trader Joe. I wanted the Philippines to make the ube pancake. They don't want to deal with the equipment, so they'd rather sell the raw product. So now the person in between that's producing this is making more money that should have been left in the Philippines if we create a high product value for our ube. Because ube can go on butter now, they can go in jellies, they can go in jams, they can go on pandesal. So even now, IHOP wants to buy ube from us. Mm-hmm. So, but where do I get it? I don't have any more source to get it. Mm-hmm. And competition-wise, Singapore, the Melonia ice cream came up with ube ice cream again. So it's like depleting our supply, but it doesn't increase. The farmers is still the same number of farmers. So I wish more people get interested in farming, and really that's where we can help our country. That's how we can help, develop other products regarding ube. It has so far to go if we just invest.
And I think too, Tita Pearl, it's so much also about how can we
Yes.
entrepreneurs from the States also
Yes.
make sure that our farmers are getting more of the cut, and we're reducing what the middleman is making, right? Because that's what makes it sustainable. And I think that's
Exactly.
what incentivizes them to want to plant this year round. Lennie, how about for you? Was there any part of your process, whether it be, starting the business, the production, or the actual, harvest, that you think could be improved, specifically when thinking about, the next generation of entrepreneurs that want to go into this kind of business?
Well, for me, it's a supply issue for Filipinos. Farmland in the Philippines for salt industry has continued to decline for various reasons, whether it be the families have discontinued to work because of profitability, or through urban sprawl, or even through kids being more educated and wanting to work in cities and not wanting to do the laborious work that sea salts really is all about. The type of salt that I purchase is strictly the uniodized sea salt. And in the Philippines, as you probably all know, the ASIN law prohibits natural unprocessed sea salt that's not iodized to not be sold in the Philippines. So even sourcing that can be difficult, and negotiating with the farmer that I will purchase X amount before you iodize your entire inventory. And again, because of the seasonality factor in the Philippines, there is no storage, there is no inventory once the season is over. That tends to be difficult if I were to, let's say, start ordering, container loads. Right now, I'm still at 1 container load, but that's from, my beginnings of only purchasing a pallet.
Yeah.
So I can, that improvement and moving salt here in the US that's all natural, unprocessed, full spectrum sea salt into other areas other than just salt itself being sold to restaurants, it's now being used as a main ingredient in food products.
Nice.
So I have one account that's purchasing a container load specifically to be the ingredient of their food product. But if I were to store this salt in the Philippines, it's not possible, because I would have to purchase and hold it and then bring it in as I need it, because the seasonality factor and the way the salt industry is there right now prohibits that.
It's really interesting. And Lennie, maybe this is really just for my own education, but I know that, throughout history, there was a time when the human race was actually iodine deficient. And that's actually why we started almost like boosting our salts with iodine, right? But why is that practice still carried now? Is it really more for preservation, or what exactly is the logic behind that?
Well, in the Philippines, there's the ASIN law, and I'm not an expert in it, but when it was passed, I believe it was in 1995, instead, and this was to battle goiter and for health issues, but the law that was created was to iodize all salt, not just some salts, but all salts to be sold in the Philippines. And what that did is, and as with all good intentions, it created a decline in the salt industry, because not all farmers, one, could afford the iodine, or two, have the ability to fund themselves in allowing, it became a very difficult task for these farmers to comply. And so you have some farmers that comply or do it secretly on the side. And there's been word out there that they get harassed if they don't iodize. And so it's easier to sell the land, have more profit, and move on to something else.
The really interesting thing to me, Lennie, is that, like you said, right, I'm sure the law was created with all good intentions.
All good intentions, yeah.
When you think about some of the most expensive salts from all over the world, right? You think about like Fleur de Sal, you think about Himalayan sea salt, and I'm actually looking at my pantry right now. I have it's called Borometti. Borometti makes Italian sea salt, right? That I only use for pasta. those are actually the ones that are priced the highest, and none of them are treated with iodine. So
Right.
really interesting about, I think it's also a call for all of us collectively, right, to review how relevant certain laws are and how prohibitive they might actually be, in as it might relate to our agricultural growth. PJ, how about for you? Was there a particular part of the process that you felt was like a stumbling block or a roadblock that you think could potentially be improved?
Yes, there's a lot of things that are kind of covered here, but the stumbling block is always on the last mile. It's always the biggest challenges we'd had in the past, and we've since resolved them, but it was a massive loss for everyone. You have a whole container of product that arrives at the port of Oakland, and then the FDA decides to inspect it. It's routine, but then they reject it. And there's a lot of things that can be done and have to be done to avoid that. And the unfortunate thing is that if that isn't approached properly, it becomes a huge loss for every party involved, and it happens at the very, very end of the process. So it can be pretty devastating, especially for some of the small farmers, or even cash-strapped businesses who are putting their capital on the line to acquire inventory. So that's where some other financial instruments like letters of credit that have verifications on milestones of this type of thing, and it helps keep everybody focused on making sure that it gets released by the FDA upon import.
And before I actually jump, because I know you are one of the most genius marketing pros I know. What would you say are maybe 2 or 3 of the things that people absolutely need to think about before they start marketing any food product internationally?
You're referring to me as the marketing pro? Oh my goodness.
That's you.
The first thing I think is to really put your brain around the real addressable market. When we're passionate about these foods, it's easy for us to tell ourselves and for our family to tell us that what we have is great and it's going to be the best thing in the world. That can be a very, very expensive assumption. So you got to be really real. How many people, how many stores, how many restaurants, how much can you move? What are the real numbers? Can you sustain a couple of years of struggle? So before you put your money anywhere real, do as much simulation as you can from a financial standpoint, stress testing, get help, get mentors to poke holes in your business model. That will keep you, I think, from I guess making all the mistakes that Lennie and I have made. So we want you to avoid those. That's the general idea. The second thing is, once you've figured out the actual addressable market, you have to figure out how mature is that market. Is it at the beginning? Are you going to be putting in all of your own efforts and resources and educating the market to make sure it uptakes? Or is it kind of on the rise, or is it mature? Is it ripe for disruption? And all of those things will guide exactly how you go about realizing that addressable market. And finally, and this is cruel, but it's true, in the US, 9 out of 10 retail products fail. It has nothing to do with the vision of the founder, or any specific ingredient, or even the quality of the product. It's usually a combination of all of those things. And most of those problems can be solved with money if you have unlimited amounts of it. So you just got to be really real with yourself about what's out there and tool your approach accordingly. You'll get what you want.
I want to say too, as someone who is in the business of marketing, right? Like a lot of people will create the product, sell it, get an Instagram account, right? Send the product to different influencers and not really think first about brand, right? Like, what's the story of the product? Who's making it? Can you tell the story of the people farming it, where it's from, right? Like, ano yung kwento, ano yung chismis? What's the name of the product? How is it marketed? What's the color of the packaging? A lot of these things kind of become like secondary, and it kind of becomes like a whoops, we didn't really think about that, but I guess now we should, right? It kind of becomes an afterthought. But what I'm learning right now, PJ, Tita Pearl, is that if we were to put this into like one streamlined process, I would say it's first educate, create the demand, and then you market, right? So much of being able to really push forward a lot of these food products kind of rests on educating the market first. Like, what is Philippine sea salt and why can it compete against the fleur de sels and Himalayan pinks of the world? What is ube and why is it way cooler than, fill in the blanks?
Potatoes.
Yeah. So, Fiona and James, was there any particular roadblock that you encountered starting the business in the Philippines? And can you share what that was like?
Any particular roadblock? Well, it's definitely like hydroponics, anything to do with like innovating the agriculture industry, because it's kind of old school over here. So hydroponics is totally next level, 5 steps across. But the point is, we just want to introduce it and try to get people to move towards that direction of more efficient like farming systems. That's the idea behind it, is to try and be as sustainable as possible with all of your inputs, your resources, to maximize your output. So I think the biggest hurdle was the barrier to entry in terms of the knowledge gap.
I feel it. And Fiona, would you say, so, a lot of the time when people talk about hydroponics or even like technology in agriculture, right? It sounds very, I will say it bluntly, it sounds expensive. Is this actually scalable to the level of the average farmer that is working the land, whose family has probably been doing so for generations across the different provinces?
As we see with, like technology and such, the more widespread and accessible something is, then people start to try and find, economies of scale and make something cheaper and cheaper as you go along. So yes, right now, hydroponics in the international sense is very capital intensive, but the principles of hydroponics are very cheap. It's water, it's nutrients, it's plants. So it can be scalable and replicable on a very low cost way.
Which is great news, because now it means that even if you live in the city and maybe you don't really have like a huge plot of land, that there's actually something that you can do with the space that you do have. And I think a lot of Filipino Americans who live out here, who might not necessarily have family in the provinces, but maybe have, a tito, tita, lola, lola in the big cities who might actually have a smaller property, can actually begin this and kind of dip their hands into agriculture. And, I think you're right, Fiona, you talk so much, you kind of touched on how it does feel like it's an old school industry, the technology is old school. But as a matter of fact, we're seeing that more and more younger Filipino Americans, millennials, even Gen Zs, are really trying to look back to agriculture and see how they can get into this business. And I think it's pretty fascinating. The one thing that I want to say, what I learned in the conversation that I had with a radio show from Mindanao last week, and actually this wasn't even part of the conversation. As the interview was happening, I literally went online to one of the banks that is a major lender for one of the biggest crops in the Philippines. And I'll tell you what my experience was. And I'm pretty tech savvy. I mean, I'm decent, right? It was so hard to navigate the website. Like, where do you even find the list of like what's required, right, to avail of a loan? How can you now fill it out? Because not everyone has access to a printer, but if you literally have like an hour or 2 hours at an internet cafe or whatever, how can you now just like quickly do this online? And that for me is a major issue, because right now what that says is that you're creating an access barrier from people, and it now becomes a question of, well, whoever has the more money, more access to internet, more capital, is now going to have better access into this industry. And unless we're able to fix something as basic as that, that's going to become a pervasive issue. The last thing that I wanted to just kind of go around, I know we're kind of hitting the time, we're about to hit the hour, but I wanted to know, with all of the challenges, right, all the great feedback, all the marketing and the capital that has to go in this, the blood, sweat, and tears, what is it that keeps you going? What are some of the benefits? I mean, we're trying to encourage more people to get into this business. Maybe let's start with James. What benefit do you get out of this?
For me, being more of an advocate, actually what I was going to say earlier was that one of the challenges is really getting the youth more involved, especially here in the Philippines, because it is something that, you know, we're talking about food here. Like, this is never going to go like out of style or not be relevant ever. Like this is food. And so it's really getting people to get back into it and to innovate. You know, there's room to innovate. And for me, it's more of like a necessity more than, you know, kind of like a benefit. And yeah, for me, that's more how I see it.
Thank you. Love that. Fiona, how about you? What keeps you going?
The people involved. You know, farming is was a family business for me, but it's become more than family. It's become a sense of duty for my countrymen. So that's what keeps me going.
I love that. Tita Pearl, how about you?
For me, it started as a challenge because here I was in the United States. I know Chinese is popular, but here comes Vietnamese, Cambodian. They're beating the heck out of Filipino food. So it's a challenge for me that I cannot accept. Filipino food is a lot better. So I get to talking to PJ, and we want to put Filipino food front and center. So he said, I think we have to create curiosity for other people. And that's how our challenge at Filipino Food Movement started. We gathered like-minded people to help us promote, talk about Filipino, educate, like as you said, everything about it. And then involve the second generation to go into cooking. Because in the Philippines, being a chef is like katulong job. But here in the US, it's not. So we have to encourage all the Filipino chefs to go into cooking, to go into, you know, being a restaurant owners. And that's how I founded my Cucinero Alliance. All the chefs working together and inventing, making Filipino food better. And actually during the pandemic is where Filipino hit the mark. We organized a group called Norcal Kababayan, and we have 75,000 members. Putting the sellers and the buyers together. So even now, that's why my Ube went crazy because of these people too. So I've always been partial to Filipino products, and I think we ourselves or the Filipinos ignore it. So I put it front and center in their faces that we Filipinos have a great agricultural product. We used to be the #1 producing rice, and we can be at it again. So going back to agriculture is what I hope everybody goes back to.
So Tita, for you, it's really pride, no?
Yes. Yes, pride.
You know, Tita, you also touched on something very important. You know, you were saying that in the Philippines, there's this whole notion that being a chef is, it's at the level, it's a katulong ka lang.
Katulong level, yes.
And you know, that's actually one thing that I am personally committed to changing.
Yes.
Right? There is nothing that is not amazing and, like, you know, I think as dignified as being a cook or household help. I mean, when you think about it, you know, I mean, I was raised by my nanny. I learned how to cook from my nannies. And I think that even that small mindset that not all people and not all fields of work are equal, I think is something that we have to challenge. It's so outdated. It's 2021, guys. We survived the pandemic. Like, let that die with COVID, right? Anyway, DJ, how about for you? What keeps you going?
So for me, I think it started out, and it will always be, a journey of personal self-discovery. It's a personal curiosity of how can I be Filipino and look like this? It's like, I'm still working on that. Yeah. Like for me personally, is about identity. So this is how I discover my roots, and going back and experiencing it as frequently as I do, I don't quite belong there either. And you know, I think I referred to that earlier, but to Fiona's point, I do feel this duty to those that came before me to take care of these sacred knowledge, sacred ideas. Like if you think about it, when it was trading among the islands, we were largely defined by the commodities that we brought to trade. And that is kind of happening still today. So in this sense, what kind of goes, what's now keeping me going is that to consume Filipino food is to not just enjoy Filipino food, but it's to be Filipino. It's the only thing to me that is truly and undeniably an expression of my Filipino-ness.
Yes.
And actually, PJ, you always say this. I know being, mestizo, people don't always automatically think that you're Filipino, but I have to say that being the advocate that you are and all the work that you've done in the community, you win the badge. I give you your
Yes.
Anyway, Lennie, how about you? What keeps you going? I know it's a tough industry. It's really rough to compete against, the big salts of the world, but we've got something going on here.
Well, what keeps me going really is I'm a true believer. I'm a true believer in Philippine sea salts. Not my company, Philippine Sea Salts, but Philippine Sea Salts, because I truly believe it can compete on the world stage. Mm-hmm. We can bring our salts to all countries. It's possible. We just have to believe in it. We have to get support, obtain that support, and keep it going, because there are farmers out there that are still doing it, and they truly are artisans in what they do. And if you haven't seen a real harvest happen, you will be amazed at what goes on behind it. It's truly a laborious work. You have to care for the land. You have to care for the product. And because of that, we have some beautiful salts from the Philippines. And just bringing it to the US in the areas that I've been able to bring it to, the opportunities are still out there, and it's still far greater. And so if we can get the government to help these farmers in ways that they can produce more, produce efficiently, and export it, I think the industry has a bright future ahead of it, and an opportunity that's still untappable.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree, Lennie. And the interesting thing is that within the hour, we've only really covered a handful of products, right? We've talked about salt, we've talked about ube, about fresh produce that can be grown hydroponically. We haven't even talked about rice yet. We haven't even talked about the fascinating process and the sophisticated technology that was created by by some of the Ifugao tribe up in the northern mountains, and how they're able to create some of the most organic, healthiest, most ridiculously amazing, grains and strains of rice in the world. And I think that, to Lennie's point, there is so much more that there is to explore. There's a huge market waiting out there. And there are also a ton of questions that have come in. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but I do want to read one. This question is for James from Aubrielle Isla. Her question is, what are your plans this year as Ambassador of Agriculture? Are there any focuses on any programming? Is there anything that you can share?
Definitely more to spread awareness, and I guess through creating content, which is something that, a generation now, that's the way that they interact the most, is through content. And one of the big things we've been working on and planning for was supposed to be this year, but then because of quarantine and everything, things got slowed down. But it was really to do a kind of like an agriculture series called Food for the Soul, which would be basically us traveling around the Philippines, visiting different farms, kind of taking a look at the food supply chain, all the different things that are being farmed and all the different processes, just so that the people, especially the youth, can see what's actually happening, and then they can see it in like a fun way, and hopefully want to get more involved.
Wonderful.
So that's something we're working on.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.
And of course, I would love to work. Me and Fiona would love to work with everyone, not just here on this panel, but with all the farmers and everyone who's doing amazing things in the agriculture industry.
Sounds great. Well, I think that about wraps it up. I wish we could have a much longer discussion, but it looks like we're already past the hour. We do want to thank everyone for their active participation during this conversation. Thank you for all the questions. I know that someone is taking note, and we'll be sure to try to get back to you with all the information that is available to us. Thank you, Consul General Ferrer and Undersecretary Vismonte, for your leadership. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights and inspiring our kababayans and our young and aspiring agricultural entrepreneurs or agripreneurs. Please do reach out to the DTI's offices here in the United States for more information about the TNK program that stands for Trabaho Negosyo Kabuhayan, which in English, if you don't know what it means, is labor, business, and livelihood. The office in New York is headed by Nicanor Batista, Silicon Valley by Trade Commissioner Celine Layug, Los Angeles by Trade Commissioner Eric Elnar, and WDC by STC Raymond Batak. Contact information will be available in the chat box. And we'd love to hear from you over at the Filipino Food Movement. We are at filipinofoodmovement.org. You can look us up on Instagram or Facebook. It's pretty easy to find us. Join us Thursdays at 12 noon Pacific for Culinary Live. We hope to see everyone again in the follow-up sessions in the coming months. In July, so mark your calendars, July we're doing one on learning how to finance and train for your agribusiness. In August, we're doing one called Balik Probinsya, a regional spotlight. And finally, we'd like to invite all of our participants to take a couple minutes to accomplish our feedback form. The link is also going to be made available in the chat box. Your insights and comments can help us to further improve our TNK program. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the Philippine Departments of Trade and Industry and Agriculture and the Consulates General here in San Francisco and all over the United States, magandang gabi if you're in the East Coast and West Coast, and we hope you have a great day over in the Philippines. We'll see you guys again soon. Bye.
Bye.